The CBC lies. They lied about the Alberta Premier to meddle in an election. They lied about the Freedom Convoy to debunk the single largest human rights demonstration of our time. And they will lie about you. So help me tell them what a bunch of shameless liars we all know them to be at cbclies.com. Did you see that absolutely incredible retraction by the CBC just the other day? Now, before we get into exactly just what the retraction says, let's get into the reason for the retraction and how devastating the CBC's purposefully false story was. And if not for the good sense of my fellow Albertans, it could have been much, much worse. And it took CBC over 6 months to do the right thing, not because they wanted to do the right thing, but because they were issued a very stern legal threat by Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Let's go back a little. Back in January, the CBC published a story, really an allegation of direct contact between the Premier's office and prosecutors working on files of COVID lockdown scofflaws still before the courts. If it were true, it would be a scandal akin to something Justin Trudeau has done with his friends at SNC-Lavalin. Justin Trudeau's government leaned very hard on then Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould to cut a deal for that Liberal-linked engineering firm accused of fraud and bribery. The Justice Minister quit over it. Premier Smith, however, said something very different occurred. She said she did not directly contact prosecutors, but she did have her advisors consider ways to end the COVID prosecutions. Because the crimes these people were alleged to have done, well, they're no longer crimes. It was a campaign promise of Smith's, in fact. It was no secret. She made that promise to seek a way to end the COVID prosecutions when she was running to replace outgoing lockdown Premier Jason Kenney. And there's some very recent precedent for all of this. When marijuana was legalized here in Canada, the federal government looked for ways to end the prosecutions of people who were facing charges under the old marijuana legislation. Makes sense, right? Why continue to pursue people for things that are no longer illegal? It's completely reasonable and normal, and it happens all the time when laws change. CBC alleged something very different. They said there was direct contact between the Premier's office and prosecutors working on these files. And it was done in the form of emails and other communications. There was a paper trail. It was a scandal, but it wasn't true. Here's the retraction CBC was forced to post this week. An earlier version of the story, published January 19th, 2023, referred to emails allegedly sent by a staffer in Danielle Smith's office to the Alberta Crown Prosecution Service. Based on testimonies by confidential sources, CBC News at the time described those emails as, quote, challenging prosecutors' assessment and direction on cases stemming from the Coutts border blockades and protests. An editor's note was added the following day to specify that CBC News had not seen the emails. On May 18, 2023, Alberta's Ethics Commissioner Marguerite Trussler released a report that included an investigation of an allegation published by CBC that a member of the Premier's staff emailed a Crown prosecutor about a case before the courts. Trussler reported that she found no evidence of such an email, adding she can only come to the conclusion, based on the evidence that she has, that no Crown prosecutor was emailed directly about any of the cases. At the same time, Trussler found that Danielle Smith had contravened the Conflicts of Interest Act in an interaction with the Minister of Justice and Attorney General in relation to Coutts charges, for which Smith has apologized. After the Ethics Commissioner's report was released, CBC News reviewed its journalism and interviewed a number of sources and parties to the matter. Confronted with the Commissioner's report, our sources have insisted that Crown prosecutors felt political pressure regarding the Coutts cases, but they are not able to confirm that the emails they originally described were sent directly from the Premier's office to the Crown. So now we're down to feelings. As such, we have updated the story and related pieces, removing references to direct contact between the Premier's office and prosecutors, which the Premier has vehemently denied. CBC News regrets reporting direct contact by email. But the damage was already done. You see, the Alberta Premier was rolling towards her election this spring, and the allegation that she had put unwarranted and illegal pressure on the prosecutorial service here in Alberta hung like a dark cloud over the election. It drew into question the Premier's ethics and quite possibly contributed to flipping a few close ridings in the favour of the NDP. It was not enough for the CBC to have their team, the NDP, back in office, but it was enough to hurt the Premier and the integrity of the Alberta election with the CBC's lies. But this wasn't the first time that the CBC has lied and lied and lied in very recent history about people because CBC disagreed with their political viewpoints. The CBC had to retract 2 separate stories alleging that the anti-mandate Freedom Convoy of 2022 had been some sort of Kremlin-backed operation. Russians under the hood of every big rig in the nation's capital protesting for freedom for 3 weeks. It was wrong. In fact, crowdfunding platforms GoFundMe and GiveSendGo, which were the main crowdfunding platforms for the Freedom Convoy, completely debunked CBC's conspiracy theories and misinformation. The CBC also speculated, apropos of nothing, that the convoy was then funded by Americans to destabilize Canadian democracy. Wrong again. The only organization attempting to destabilize democracy was the CBC, with their attempts to meddle in the Alberta election with their unfounded lies about the Premier. As they say, I think that phone call was coming from inside the house. Now, normally I don't care if a media company is dishonest. You know exactly what I'm talking about here. If you get your news from the mainstream media, they get things wrong constantly. And I like to let my money do the talking. I don't subscribe to companies that I don't trust. The problem is the CBC is Canada's state broadcaster, and I have to pay for their lies, and so do you. The CBC, with their CEO, Catherine Tate, who incidentally lives in New York, is directly subsidized by the federal government to the tune of nearly $1.5 billion annually to provide Canadian content, to their American CEO aside. The network also gets exclusive contracts for advertising from the federal government to continue to fill its dwindling coffers. And the CBC gets preferential treatment as a broadcaster, meaning it's shoehorned into every cable package and satellite package in every Canadian home with a cable or satellite package. Do you want to pay for their lies? I don't. And if they're willing to lie about powerful people like premiers, and if they're willing to lie about the Freedom Convoy, fully knowing their lies would be debunked by the very organizations taking in those crowdfunding dollars, imagine what they will say about you. The CBC needs a healthy helping of embarrassment. They need to see just how many Canadians reject their lies and refuse to trust Justin Trudeau's pets over at the state broadcaster. Truly, these people at CBC have nuked their own credibility, but they just don't care because there will never be the market correction they so rightly deserve, because Justin Trudeau takes from you and gives to them no matter what. Because CBC lies about all the right people, don't they? CBC lies about the strongest opposition Justin Trudeau has ever faced in his lifetime, the Freedom Convoy. The CBC lies about the Premier, who has promised to fight Trudeau tooth and nail for the rights of her province, Danielle Smith. So what can we do as citizens, as forced subsidizers of these lies, but send a very strong message of our own? Please add your name to the list of Canadians who think that CBC lies, because they do lie. And even through their own retractions and corrections, CBC knows that they are liars too. So just go to cbclies.com and sign my petition, and we'll make sure we get it in the hands of the CBC and the Heritage Minister in charge of the CBC. These folks need reminding that there's more to life than Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. And we don't want to pay for CBC disinformation anymore. Go to cbclies.com and sign the petition. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila.